Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Assalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad and all of you who arrived today. May Allah bless you all and honor you all and honor our Shaykh for making the time today. I'm sure many of you are regulars at Innai. Innai have always been a community center and a bookstore where we all get in touch with our spirituality and our earnestness to learn and to come closer to Allah. Bismillah. Today we are so fortunate to have Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad, who has been making a lot of rounds around Kuala Lumpur, alhamdulillah, and we are the one who's so blessed to receive this bestowal from Allah, indeed in terms of knowledge. He does not need much introduction, but just to follow with the regular procedure, I'll continue. Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad, also known as Professor Timothy J. Winter, is one of the United Kingdom's leading Muslim scholars. He is the founder of the Cambridge Muslim College and one of the founders of Europe's first eco-mosque, the Cambridge Central Mosque. Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad was educated at the universities of Cambridge, in Amsterdam, and in Al-Azhar. He is the author of several books, which I'm sure many of you own copies of them. But I'd like to share a bit of a personal journey. Shaykh, actually, I've been in touch with your thoughts since the early 1990s. I remember the time when I was a first-time mother, and I found myself being a stay-at-home mom and having to spend a lot of time, breastfeeding, cooking. I thought that my brain would go frozen. So always, Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad would come up with very profound writings through the website of Masroor Ahmad Khan, and I would always get a copy, and that would be, what I do beside all of the other household duties, and I feel that it has really enriched me to this very day, and alhamdulillah, Allah bless the Shaykh for that impact on a personal note. For the topic that we have today, Tawhid, a solution for a fractured world. We all know what this means, what fractured means, perhaps individually or throughout the world. But without further delay, I invite our Shaykh to illuminate us on this.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. It's quite a small space, so if people at the back aren't receiving my signal very clearly, I think we can all kind of move forward and snuggle up a little bit, and inshallah the technology will play only a supplementary role. The question of the one and the many is what I suppose we're talking about, which means we're dealing with the foundational question of all traditional metaphysics in every thoughtful religion, which is the relationship between the apparently indefinite multiplicity of things and the categoric unicity of their source. From the wahda comes kathra. And this problematic has been, as it were, underlined by the discoveries of the contemporary sciences, where we know that there is much more kathra than the Kalam theologians or the other pioneers of medieval discussions of Tawhid envisaged. The idea of there being 7 spheres and then a sphere of fixed stars has been removed in favour of a universe of perplexing immensity, a world of over 1 trillion galaxies, each of which may contain over 1 billion stars, and clusters of galaxies, metastructures in the universe that are quite bewildering. And also in the micro world, moving from telescopes to microscopes and to increasingly strong vehicles, practical, instrumental, theoretical, for determining the kathra, the multiplicity of the invisible world, we find that we have progressively moved into an understanding of the complexity of small biological structures, and then the composition of individual cells, a billion of which may make up the metabolism of a living human being, and each of which represents a particular internal universe of processes and patterns. And some of you might have even seen on the internet the famous Harvard University animation of the complex life and almost industrial processes that seem to happen inside the average cell, not to mention the complexities of the production of antibodies and forms of resistance to intrusions, viruses in particular, that penetrate the outer defenses of each cell. A world of wonders. But then beyond that, as the instrumentation grows more capable, the atomic world and even the subatomic world and the discovery of an ever broader range of subatomic particles. Sometimes they say that the elusive one, the Higgs boson, is the God particle that explains all of the other particles, but however far out they go with the telescopes and however in they go with the microscopes and the corresponding theories of the external and internal universes, the search for a unifying, if you like, secular Tawhid proves elusive. Instead, what we have is a breathtaking panoply of external and invisible signs. On top of this, these are, as it were, what the Quran would describe as the signs on the horizons. سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. We shall show them our signs on the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. What are the signs within ourselves? The signs that perplex us even more than the quasars and the pulsars and the X-ray galaxies and the supermassive black holes and the black matter that constitutes the mysterious stuff of the physical universe. The inner universe turns out to be still more puzzling, perplexing, wonderful. As we close our eyes and we ponder our internal life, our intentions, our aspirations, our inward thoughts, our values, our creativity, the fact that in this world of crashing galaxies and microbes, there can be human creativity, human morality, love, great theatre, opera, music, the creativity of Bani Adam that stems from these inner horizons, perhaps perplexes us still further. A Muslim astronomer who at the time was director of the French National Observatory gave a lecture a while back in Cambridge for Cambridge Muslim College, and his specialization is galaxy formation. So he was showing us, of course, on the PowerPoint some quite stunning images of the stuff that is out there, visible through the two major space telescopes which are currently probing the secrets of those horizons. And it was a very pretty and, of course, awe-inspiring display. It was subhanallah territory for a whole hour. Afterwards, there was the usual Q&A, and there was one question that seemed to define, for many of us, the enigma of these worlds of signs, which is that he was asked by a student, what is the most amazing thing in the universe? And we've just seen visualizations of X-ray galaxies. This is a galaxy larger than our own, with 1 billion suns, each of which emits only X-ray radiation. Some true wonders out there. There is, even in our own solar system, the planet Neptune, where the rain is made of diamonds. there is on Venus a rain that is made of sulfuric acid. Every single one of the 100 or more moons in our solar system is a separate and entirely different and enigmatic world, and there's so much kathra, so much diversity out there, that we were blown away. But the student asked, what is the most amazing thing in the universe? And after all, here is the head of the French National Observatory, who must have seen some enigmas in his time. But he paused for a while, and he said, the strangest thing in the universe is the fact that it can be understood. That we have this instrumentation that enables us to observe galaxy formation and supermassive black holes inferentially, and to see binary star systems and the other wonders of this mulk, these signs on the horizons. But the fact that we can conceptualize and calculate and analyze is something that the scientific paradigm finds it difficult to account for. So through that question you have the interface between the signs on the horizons and the signs within ourselves, the enigma of the self. Well, of course, some of the reductionist scientists say, well, the enigma of the self is also reducible to simple physiology and mechanical processes, and we simply don't understand brain function yet. But one day, we'll be able to replicate our consciousness. An LSE professor who recently said that before he dies, his mid-career at the moment, he confidently expects to be able to upload his consciousness to the World Wide Web so he can live forever, whatever that experience would exactly feel like, one doesn't know, but could also make copies of his consciousness and distribute them on USB sticks to his friends, and it could be a nice kind of Christmas present. And here I am, a USB stick, it's all in there. And this is the serious belief of many of these reductionist scientists, that it's only a matter of time before the signs within ourselves simply become more signs on the horizons. Materialism, in a sense, has to think that. And it becomes, of course, very deterministic. Such people will not believe in free will at all. Because if brain function is simply the consequence of neurons and quantum level events at the basis of the frontal cortex or whatever it is, where they think that the mystery, the self, emerges from, then nobody actually takes a free decision, because everything could be measured and predicted in advance. Some of you might possibly have read Douglas Adams' science fiction spoof, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And you may be aware that one of the tropes of this is the computer deep thought. And the computer deep thought, because inputted into itself is all of the information that prevailed at the beginning of the physical universe, shortly after the Big Bang, and on the basis of that, on this materialistic scientific predominant model, all future events are preordained and can only happen in one particular way. And therefore, deep thought would be able to know the future, and deep thought would be able to answer the mystery of life, the big questions. Well, Douglas Adams, not a religiously minded person, I know a few of his friends, he died quite young, was not foolish enough to believe that we are indeed simply automata, and that the mystery of free will, on the basis of which the wonder of humanity is based, is simply a kind of misunderstanding. But there are plenty of scientists, Donald Wegner, for instance, MIT, with his book, The Illusion of Free Will, the illusion of consciousness, the idea that we never take decisions. The brain simply identifies with certain things that are completely automated within ourselves, and presenting an interesting scientifically based challenge to some of the proud assurances of the Enlightenment, where it was believed that man is the measure of all things, and that human freedom is the highest human good. Back in the time of D'Albano and D'Holbach and Kant, the old idea of human beings having free will was fairly widely accepted. But increasingly, scientific paradigms are challenging this as a kind of relic of a more superstitious age, and are becoming more deterministic. And this is the stuff of popular science, and constitutes one of the crisis points of the Enlightenment. Because the Enlightenment also believed that science would set us free in order to express ourselves. But if science is challenging the existence of the self, as conventionally understood, has the Enlightenment not turned into a proverbial Chinese dragon that eats its own tail until it disappears. In any case, these large debates in the cultural wars need not detain us. You can look at any work of popular science by people who really don't believe in free will, people like Jared Diamond, for instance, as well as Donald Wagner, and a lot of serious philosophers who think free will is really a kind of wishful thinking, and that actually we are all automata and everything in the universe has to happen in a particular way. And you can see the often very interesting and nuanced debate which materialist philosophers and scientists are engaged in at the moment. But it is an interesting time for theologians, religiously minded people, to be thinking about these larger questions, because that question perhaps represents the largest of the existential threats which humanity currently faces. There are plenty of others. Climate change is one. There is even a growing branch of clinical psychotherapy now in the English-speaking world that deals specifically with people whose functionality is negatively affected by climate change anxiety, particularly amongst young people. There is the threat of nanotechnology, machines too small to see that might produce other machines at the molecular level, and how do you then tell them to stop producing other machines? This is the so-called grey goo scenario, which some nanotechnologists are proposing, namely that you could theoretically create a machine just out of molecules whose function was to create other machines like itself out of molecules, and then how do you stop the process? The idea being that eventually the whole world turns into a kind of mush entirely made up of these self-replicating micro machines, the grey goo scenario. The nanotechnologists as well talk about this. There's the problem of nuclear catastrophe. There is the problem of artificial intelligence. Stephen Hawking in Cambridge thought that research into it should be paused until we really have some international convention akin to the nuclear non-proliferation treaties that restrict international research and the development of forms of artificial intelligence that to some may replace our humanity. Lovelace, the famous developer of the Gaia hypothesis, back in the 50s, I think it was, when he first started toying with this, and when he was about 100, still, he died shortly afterwards, too soon to upload his consciousness onto the web, alas, is gone. But his last book was precisely about how we shouldn't be dismayed by climate change and the coming elimination of the human species, because by the time that the globe becomes uninhabitable, he thought it was not going to be stopped. The machines will have become sentient, and that will simply be the next stage in the continual evolution of life. Just as humanity replaced the Neanderthals, the new machines are going to replace Homo sapiens. We should welcome this as something positive. So these are the somewhat startling ideas that the scientists are toying with at the moment. And we have a number of people who are predicting the end of humanity by the end of the current century, such as Martin Rees, who's the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at the University of Cambridge and the Astronomer Royal, who has a book called Our Final Century, in which he predicts, as a not noticeably religious person, just as a scientist, that the chances are that these proliferating existential risks will just kill us all. One or another of them will get us by the end of the century. So, but it's an interesting place or time to theologize, because the old excitement about science and technology are going to save the world and make us all supermen and more comfortable and eliminate disease, and everybody will have a washing machine and an electric car and will live on Mars and it will be wonderful. That has been chastened now by an awareness of the presence of these existential risks that threaten not just the Western secular civilization that enables them, but all life on Earth really. Much of the current collapse in population around the world seems to be related in some way to soft plastic pollution and so on. So it's an interesting time to reflect on what a religious perspective, and particularly an Islamic, solidly monotheistic perspective, might be offering. or might not be offering, in order to contribute to these current culture wars, which are now not, as they were, say, in the 18th century, between religion and science, but are rather between optimistic and pessimistic scientists, with religion being either ignored or sometimes treated with a little bit more respect than it was even a couple of generations ago, as the science-based paradigms of human salvation have kind of been chastened somewhat by the implications of this enabled technology. So, what might it look like? Well, if we've been invited to speak about the implications of what is the kind of master signifier of Islamic theology, which is the intense monotheism of the Quranic message, we need to first of all take a step back and think about what kind of articulation of monotheism Islam is recommending. There are different ways of saying what is monotheistic. Part of the divine wisdom, according to the scholars of Islam, having been placed amongst a people people whose ancestors were not warned and so they are heedless, is that there was a kind of culture war in 7th century Arabia of a particularly absolute kind. The people of the Jahiliyyah operating a form of polytheism, the people of the Jahiliyyah without an overarching ethos or law, but simply tribal virtue, so that if somebody kills a member of your tribe, the remedy was not to go to a judge, because there were no judges, but to kill a member of their tribe, and so vendetta, Cosa Nostra kind of mafia culture prevailed, the Tha'ar, the vengeance culture of the pagan Arabians, and no particular interest in life after death. From what we can discern from the Jahili poetry that's come down to us, they weren't very interested, certainly weren't very optimistic. The most you get in the Jahili poetry, despite its creativity and kind of solemn beauty, is the owl that settles upon the grave of the unjustly killed victim, and whose hooting at night is actually a call for vengeance. That's the nearest you can get to a Jahili conception of survival after death, a rather melancholy type of humanism. So the Islamic revolution upending of Arabia is more drastic than that which we find in the founding story of most other world religions. The Buddha appears in North India 1,000 years earlier or more. But what he's speaking about is still the same kind of wheel of samsara, cyclical view of history, a cyclical view of human becoming, metempsychosis, reincarnation. The ethical system is not far removed from that of the Brahmanical elites as it had begun to exist in that just post-Vedic age. He was preaching to the partially converted. Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam comes 6 centuries before the Hijrah in the pocket of Jewish Palestinian monotheism that had traded up to a monotheistic view, to a form of Tawhid, a genuine form of Tawhid, although it was surrounded on all sides by an ocean of paganism. So he was talking to people who were already half converted. They knew what he was talking about, and he would quote the Hebrew Bible, and he was speaking their language. He was one of them. But the task which Providence set before the Khatam, seal of the messengers, was of a different order of difficulty and magnitude. Said to these people whose forefathers had not been warned, who after Ismail alayhi salam had collapsed pretty quickly into a crude form of image worship, to the mass deployment of magic, to a very strong social stratification, to an absence of universal law and virtue, to an absence of belief or hope in life after death. And you had to take those people from that end of the religious spectrum all the way to the other end of the religious spectrum in 23 years. The greatest intellectual, moral, human, national revolution that you can think of in human history in a very short time. So having had no interest in life after death, at the end of those 23 years they're reading the Quran, so much of which is about heaven and hell and judgment and the significance of our actions. So from having had no law at all, but just tribal tit-for-tat killings, Cosa Nostra style, that was abolished. And it was abolished at the final pilgrimage when all of the dam of the Jahiliyyah was wiped out. No more vendettas, no more feuds, and replaced by the Sharia, in which if somebody kills a member of your tribe, his membership of your tribe is no longer relevant because you go to the Qadi who doesn't care which tribe you are, or which nationality you are. The equality of believers, which is one of the masterpieces of monotheism. A big transition. And then also taking them, and this was the kind of underlying principle which enabled these other revolutionary changes, from the many to the one. Not Allat and Hubal and Al-Uzza and all of the other deities of the ancient Arabs, which were symbolically and actually displayed in a circle, goggling around the house of Abraham, besieging it, as it were, and even invading its inner sanctum, the defiling of Abraham's house. The great moment when he comes down from Qudai in his sort of final conquest, and on his camel al-Qaswa he points with his staff to each one of the idols, and they fall and they break, and he says, Ja al-haq wa zahaq al-batil, inna al-batila kana zahuqa. Truth has come, falsehood has fled away. It is the nature of falsehood to flee away. And after a few years, who knew their names? The British pilgrim Headley Churchward, who wrote one of the nice early accounts of a British Muslim in Mecca in the late Ottoman period, was an artist and did some very interesting images of places in Mecca which no longer exist. And one of the things that he was intrigued by was the fact that when you went into some of the gates of the Haram and you looked at the stones, the flagstones, they were actually the original idols of Quraysh that had been turned upside down, and you would take your shoes off on them and they were humiliated forever. I don't know where they put them. Okay. Somebody must have known what they were when they were being taken up, but their whereabouts is unknown. So, just 23 years, another huge revolution from belief in an indefinite number of spooky deities to the one, God of Abraham, but a formulation of monotheism that was particularly absolute. That is to say, our definition of Tawhid is that there is no kathra in the divine, no multiplicity in the divine nature. Tawhid mutlaq, absolute unicity. Similarly, there is nothing that can be compared to the absolutely unique. Laysa kamithlihi shay, which doesn't actually translate as nothing resembles him. But if you look at this strange Arabic formulation, which you'll struggle to find anywhere else in the language, kamithlihi, it's an odd thing, like his likeness. How do you translate that? Nothing resembles his likeness. So the ulama say the reason for this is that even though human beings might come up with certain metaphysical descriptions of what is like, but nothing even resembles, he does not even resemble those analogies and symbols. Subhana, the absolute, the one. Nur al-Anwar, how do you describe the shape of light? And light is again one of those images which is just kind of helps our poor, frail human capacities to look in the right direction, but isn't a description. The divine predicates, God's names, according to the ulama of Ahl Sunnah, are pointers or indicators which are true, but they're not descriptors in the usual human sense. Because if they became descriptors, then you are somehow likening God to his creatures, and it becomes kind of like Santa Claus, or a God that becomes a human being, or some other way of bringing God down to the level which we can understand. But Laysa kamithlihi shay. Nothing resembles his likeness. We need to reflect, why is it that this final revelation in the Abrahamic cycle and in the cycle of all revelation emphasizes this particularly severe and absolute idea, tajreed, stripping away of any kind of comparisons for our times? Why this particularly pure metaphysic, this Tawhid? And if nothing resembles his likeness, why so many names? The one who said nothing is like him, nothing is like that which is like him, but then there's Lahul Asma'ul Husna, fad'uhu biha, his are the most beautiful names, and no other scripture has so many names of the divine. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, Al-Salam, Al-Mu'min. The Quran is unusual amongst world scriptures in that it packs its pages with descriptors, and so many verses end with or Qawim Aziz or whatever it might be, names. Well, again, the ulama say these point to truly principles that can be interpreted as pointing towards the divine, but not him. Whatever you conceive him to be, he is other than that. So we have this very kind of philosophically rigorous sort of absolute conception of what it is to be monotheistic. But at the same time, because we don't really personalize God, God doesn't enter a human body and walk around and buy things and agonize and pray, and we don't do that the way the ancient Greeks used to do it. Instead, we have Nur al-Anwar, the light of lights, whom we address in prayer. You can still use personal pronouns, and the Quran uses personal pronouns, through the heart's intuition of what it is that these names point to. And the fact that through the transformation of human beings, we are given a hint of holiness, and therefore we experience the divine presence. Why is it, after all, that Nur al-Anwar, being itself, didn't just give us a book, but sent us a man with a book? And the man is the one upon whose heart the Iqra appears. And the enormous pressure of it, Inna sanulqi alayka qawlan thaqila, which will send down upon you a heavy word. So he goes to Khadija radiallahu anha, shaking, yarjufu fu'adu. His heart was shaking because of the immense scale beyond the universe itself of God's ancient speech, experience unimaginable to ourselves. And then his perfections correspond in the eyes of the Arabs whose hearts are slowly melting, and particularly those who are in any case humbler, outcast, outgroups, slaves, Ethiopians, women and so forth, those who congregated around him in the first instance because their hearts were less encrusted with pride. Because in his qualities, in his akhlaq and shama'il and his shiyam, they detected the breath of eternity. And this is in the Tirmidhi hadith, and we were discussing this earlier, تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ, which is another necessarily enigmatic commandment. Acquire God's character traits. So on the one hand, the divine is beyond characterization, but we have the names that faithfully point us towards him. But on the other hand, we have the fact that there can be human instantiations and representations of these qualities, which is the basis of our ethical system. Imam Ghazali writes his Al-Maqsad al-Asna in order to reflect on what are the human implications of the existence of archetypes of perfection. How do I know I should be merciful? Because we know mercy is a noble principle, because it's something God has described as being in himself. Kataba ala nafsihi ar-rahmah. So it's a virtue for humans. How do we know justice is a virtue in this world that otherwise is just atoms of values? Because God has described himself as being just. And of course, the human representation of these qualities is nothing like the divine representation. But because there's a certain musharaka, a certain sharing of the name between creator and creature with these qualities, we know that this is the path where we turn away from our lower selves, which is the opposite of justice and the opposite of mercy and the opposite of giving to others, and we reconform ourselves through the prophetic model that reconformed the Arabs away from the ego thing of the Jahiliyyah towards the prophetic Sunnah. And we become oriented towards the Qibla inwardly as well as outwardly, because we are at least trying to conform to these sources of perfection. But there is a deep mystery in this. But essentially, the way of understanding the Sunnah is that it is the practical way of reflecting in your poor, frail, mortal human self universal principles which are universal because they point towards mysteriously the divine perfection. And this is one of the meanings of being Khalifa, the one who's taught all the names. One of whose meanings is that Adam was restored to himself when the names, the divine names, became a sign of his perfection. Whether or not that's your interpretation of what these names are, and the tafsir authors give you different readings, but the principle is evidently the same. The Khalifa is the one who is legitimately the upholder of the divine order and sacrality in the created realm, and therefore the person who is qualified by perfection. And perfection is to be found in virtues that exist because their origin is in the divine mystery. So it's evidently part of our Adamic nature to be reconformed to generosity, to forgiveness, to luminosity, to justice, to these qualities the path to whose acquisition and whose maintenance is called in Islam the Sunnah. If you want not just to theorize about being a nice human being, but to do it, you need the human exemplar. That's why we don't just get a book, but we get the person who shows the power of the book in terms of what a human being can be. Somebody who is human, but who is the man of the Mi'raj. So this Tawhid that we have in Islam is at the same time insistent upon the alterity, the unknowability, beyondness, the tanzih of the divine. Laysa kamithlihi shay'. And that has to be the case, because mukhalafat al-hawadith, being other than anything that is in the contingent world, is part of the kind of obvious aspect of our aqidah, and is what points to the difference between real monotheism and any kind of confusion that can lead to paganism, idolatry, and so forth. But at the same time, we have this luxuriant, human-sounding language in the Quran which urges us to recognize what it is to be a perfected human being, and which gives us an exemplar. And this is not the realm of tanzih, but the realm of what the scholars call tashbih, likening. Likening doesn't mean that you say, yes, there is something which is mythical, or like him. It means the process of inwardly as well as outwardly facing the Qibla in a state of faithful submission, following the Holy Prophet as your Imam. And just as you follow the Imam in the prayers and he says, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and you don't then say, Assalamu alaikum, you do what the Imam says. Similarly, in every aspect of our life, we accept him as our Imam because he's the perfect human being, and in him the ego is gone, and instead there are all these qualities of Tawhidic indicativity. So he's saying Allahu Akbar after all, and we shouldn't be saying anything else. The Allahu Akbar pointing to the divine mystery of that which is beyond the Qibla wall, but is greater than any kind of notion that you might have. But still, إِذَا سَأَلَكَ أَنِّي عِبَادِي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. If my slaves ask you about me, I'm near. So the one who seems to be categorically other and beyond, unlike that's necessarily the case, is also al-Qareeb, the near. And this is where the signs on the horizons come in. So part of the prophetic solution to life's enigma is to look through the Hubble Space Telescope or the electron microscope or the bubble chamber, whatever it is that they're playing with, and to see signs rather than just strange consequences of the strange Big Bang that one day some equation will explain how you get something a lot, kathra, out of nothing. But the Tawhid explains it in a way which activates the heart, the fullness of our humanity, something that science can't confirm or deny, and it's kind of not that. It's the question that the chief astronomer of France thought was the most interesting thing in creation, the essence of human wa'i, awareness, the ruh, which we are told, he is told, alayhi salatu wasalam, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. The true spiritual essence of man is something about which you have been given only a little, and that is what he is commanded to tell us. When we ask about the ruh, please, Mr. Astronomer, tell us what's the weirdest thing. He says, well, actually, the ruh is what's perceiving things in the mystery of consciousness, etc., etc. Yeah, the prophetic response to us, and we really want to know what is that bigger secret of the heavens and the earth, the me, the I, the human subjectivity. We've been given only a little knowledge. There are ways in which these things become not mysterious. There can be a kashf al-ghita, a lifting of the veil, but it's not something that any equation, however big the whiteboard is written on might be, can reach, because that's part of the reflexivity of the world, which is self-referential, which has laws that are only about itself and not about what's above or beyond itself. Like the wonders, say, of quantum mechanics, which is amazingly beautiful, it's not accessible that way. But it's to do with a kind of perception which comes from the ruh and not from the simple mind, which is where religion steps in, and where science can't really affirm or deny religion, even though science kind of helps by multiplying our amazement at the quantity and the order of things. It helps to know that the cosmos is subject to physical laws, physical constants, to know that there are X-ray galaxies and neutron stars. That kind of adds to the human need for a convincing rather than equational explanation. In many ways, it does help. But that which is most deeply perspicuous amongst us as Bani Adam is related to this mystery thing called the Ruh, whose spiritual perspicacity is noted in the Holy Quran, say in those verses in Surah Al-Najm that appear to be about the Mi'raj. مَا كَذَبَ الْفُؤَادُ مَا رَأَى. Well, the heart did not falsify or deny that which it saw, but what did it see? Well, human language is only going to mislead you if you're told what the infinite is. Or it's too much for you to handle. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, who is a man of faith, and his Kalimullah, he's spoken to the divine, he heard the voice from the fire in the desert, he was a person of yaqeen. He wants to see. Allah says, لَن تَرَانِي, you won't see me. وَلَكِنْ انظُرْ إِلَى الْجَبَلِ, look at the mountain. فَإِنْ اسْتَقَرَّ مَكَانَهُ فَسَوْفَ تَرَانِي. All of theology really is in that passage. You will not see me. But look at the mountain. If it stays in its place, then you'll see me. فَلَمَّا تَجَلَّى رَبُّكَ لِلْجَبَلِ, and when your Lord appeared to the mountain, جَعَلَهُ دَكَّا, he turned it into dust. وَخَرَّ مُوسَى صَعِقًا, and Moses fell down in a swoon. Because you're talking about the Jalal here, the Jalal of the infinite, the Jalal of the one who creates diamond rain on Neptune and wonders. It's a mercy that we don't see things in that absolute sense, but just through names and qualities of the illusion of cause and effect and the illusion of time, which in the divine are not real, because he is not encapsulated by anything external to himself. Those things are encapsulated by him. He is al-muhit, al-wasi', all including the broad, the wide, the universal. He's not subject to the ticking of the clock or distance necessarily. That's part of the purity of our Tawhid that says, Laysa kamithlihi shay'. So we cannot see in that way. But where Sayyidina Musa was told, not that I cannot be seen, but that you will not see me, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in this necessarily difficult passage, ما كذب الفؤاد ما رأى, the heart did not deny that which it saw. And we know, following the hadith and the aqidah, that in the Jannah, the highest vision, the ru'ya, will be afforded to the believers. And there's a whole mountain of explanations of how that could be and what does it mean. And the eye is a finite thing that can only grasp bounded entities, and the divine is not like so. Mu'tazila say, no, it just means you will look for further rewards from your Lord. And one of the positions that Ahl Sunnah take against the Mu'tazila in their understanding of Tawhid is that there is a vision. We don't know what it could be, because after the end of time, when the clocks are working differently and everything is transformed, you don't really know what vision is. That's how they resolve it, through a wise aversion to the mysteriousness of the divine qurb, nearness. Mu'tazilites insist on a kind of, it's kind of not possible. وَمَا ذَلِكَ عَلَى اللَّهِ بِعَزِيزٍ. That's not hard for Allah. Too much for them to do. Well, we don't speak like that. So we have this kind of balance between, on the one hand, a necessary otherness in the divine, and on the other hand, the idea of the divine nearness, meaning that he's kind of aqrabu ilayhi min hablil warid, nearer to man than his jugular vein, which means kind of really close, nearer than that. And that is the balance of the divine names, al-zahir and al-batin, outwardly manifest, inwardly secured from access. And that which perceives the qurb is not the external philosopher's attempt to build a tower, the way Fir'aun did, to see if he could get high up enough to see if he could see the divine beyond the edge of the physical universe. What's out there? If I go a little bit further, there's an edge to the universe somehow, and then you stick your head beyond it, take a look, and you see, not like that. You don't get beyond al-wasi'. But instead, مَا كَذَبَ الْفُؤَادُ مَا رَأَى, the heart did not misrepresent or deny what it saw. So Islam is authentic to this Quranic balance of tashbih and tanzih, when, as well as the outward knowledge of theology and law and ethics, which are all about conforming our poor, wriggling, egotistic, puppy-like souls to reality in our outward form, there has to be an inward conformity where the nearness experience of barakah or holiness, nafahat, the perfume of the divine presence, the mystery of the wordless becomes a possibility, becomes a reality. And the awliya in Islam have for countless generations spoken of nearness, the nearness of the indescribable and the ineffable. What the brain can't figure out, the love of the heart experiences. Maulana Rumi says, by the time intellect, aql, has saddled its camel to go on Hajj, love has already made tawaf of the Kaaba. Because this is the true religious nature of love. Rumi also says that the Buraq is a kind of figure of love. Through love that you're taken beyond any kind of scientific, and love is the perception of truth, not some kind of sentimental thing. It's an apperception of perfection and therefore of reality. Beauty is beautiful because in it we perceive truth. Allahu Jameel, Yuhibbul Jamal. The hadith says God is beautiful. He loves beauty. Why does he love beauty? Not because he treats the world as his kind of private art gallery, but because he sees human beings turned away from ego and ugliness and transformed by beauty. And he loves to be known. So if this is our particular style of religion, that we are saying that wal-awwal wal-akhir wal-zahir wal-batin, what does this mean in terms of bringing this wahda, unity, which can only fully exist in the divine reality, to this world which is the abode of kathra? And just as the science seems to have massively multiplied our perception of the number and variety of phenomena, so also the predicaments that afflict human beings seem to be proliferating, and we are, even though we are homogenized culturally by globalization, we are often driven away from each other by the technical revolutions and by the radical belief in human autonomy brought about by the Enlightenment. So we now have in the United Kingdom a ministry of loneliness. And everybody here kind of laughs because they think, well, it'd be nice to get away from my mother-in-law for a while, or to get away from my 5 children, or to stop my wife's kind of reminding me of things I need to do. Walk in the forest would be pretty nice. But in the West, everything is really fragmented because the Enlightenment idea that you're fully yourself, you're most happy and true to yourself when you are doing what you yourself wish to do, uncontaminated by submitting to the narrative of anything else, whether it be a story from the past, or family conventions, or laws. It's the idea of radical freedom. That's when you'll truly grow into your human potential. Has become such an extreme thing that actual human sociality is really breaking up. Relationships are not working. There's a mental health pandemic. A lot of people live alone. Old people in particular live alone. And it's not a happy sight. And that was really not what in the 18th century they thought the Enlightenment would lead to. They thought more science, more human freedom, more human happiness. But human beings are more complicated than that. We do actually need rules, we need boundaries, we need to know when we say a teenager, age 13 or 14, wondering about their identity in a kind of agonizing way. Well, actually, I know what it is to be a boy or to be a girl, and that really helps. Whereas nowadays in the West, they're saying, well, that's somebody else's narrative restricting you. You should be free, as if at the age of 13 or 14, you're going to reach some kind of truth that no earlier philosopher has reached, and be yourself and be right. And this is a very extreme form of persecution, really. It's a great burden for young people to carry. They need support rather than the breaking of all boundaries and just floating free in a kind of vacuum of equal, remote human centers of consciousness. That's not what we're supposed to be, because as a species we're kind of pack animals. We find our identity and our fulfillment, and the troubles that strengthen us, and the relationships which console us with other people. That's how we've always been for 100,000 years. And Deen Mu'amala, religion, is about engagement. And Mu'amala here doesn't mean with some kind of cybernetic friend bot on your mobile phone that consoles you. No, that's not the kind of osmosis that happens between human hearts, between individuals and parents, individuals and children, children with each other, between spouses, tribes, villages. We're supposed to be in this state of mu'amala. We are Bani Adam. the sons of Adam. It's a kind of kinship image of what Homo sapiens is about. Homo sapiens doesn't really do justice to us. The man that thinks, more than that. Bani Adam were part of the tribe, and we have a single ancestor that emphasizes our kind of organic kinship-based nature, what makes us thrive. And solitude is a terrible thing. We have this ministry of loneliness. 9 million people in the United Kingdom apparently diagnosed with clinically significant levels of loneliness. It's not working very well, but lots of freedom. So, in this world of so much kind of breaking up, so much multiplicity, the Tawhid thing, because it's not just an abstract philosophical thought. Plato could tell you, the absolute, the good, is absolutely one. We spoke about the one. And this is the world of manifestation. But in terms of something like the Sunnah, he wasn't really interested in a form of life that everybody could comply with, and certain processes of self-discipline that the philosopher would follow. It's very kind of elitist, and when it gets into Neoplatonism, becomes often quite sort of magical. But monotheism gifts us with a form of life, which is the way in which you really believe in Tawhid, rather than just kind of abstraction that you learn in the madrasa. God is one, Laysa kamithlihi shay, nothing is like him, he has these names, all true. But for it to be constitutive of our Iman and of our faith, and hence achieving its healing, therapeutic, soul-fixing plenitude and possibility, has to be something that exists in the human realm and that engages with us as osmotic human beings. And this is why in our literature, throughout the history of the poetry of Islam, we find this principle, the buraq as love, emphasized, which is starting to get out of focus in modern Muslim communities, or is presumed to be some kind of sentimental thing that might even be inappropriate in a serious religious context, as if we're supposed to be just worshipping the infinitely distant, ba'id, mysterious entity beyond the Qibla wall who just wants us to follow rules, and that's not adequate. The human soul craves a lot more than that. And so in our literature there's always this talk about hub, which is the basis of the hadith and nawafil, which we looked at earlier, the great Bukhari hadith about how you are transformed through the divine love. So let's just end with an interesting kind of literary reflection. The Arabs are overturned in all of these fundamental ways by the new dispensation. And they have the leader, the holy prophet, the man of Tawhid, who is an Abd al-Mahad, the absolute slave, who claims nothing for himself, whose ego is is demonstrably not there, and who amazes the pagan Arabs, the heresiarchs of Quraysh, when he kind of, after the idols fall over and break, he lets them off, which is the opposite of the tribal thing. They all think, for the high jump now, it's going to be, even the Nuremberg tribunal didn't have that. The prophetic forgiveness is astonishing. اذهبوا فأنتم الطلقاء فتفرقوا كأنهم أحيوا من القبور. They separate as if they've been brought up to life again from their graves. They thought, this is it, death row for Abu Sufyan and everybody else, given what they'd done. But Hind, again Hind, after what she did, wow, there's no ego, there's no tha'r, there's just wisdom, there's forgiveness. Greatest act of amnesty in human history, mind-boggling, and for those people, very strange. But it melted their hearts, and they became Muslim, and Hind prayed 5 times a day. SubhanAllah. That's the power of the idfa' billati hiya ahsan. And that was possible because he knew his Lord, and therefore knew that ego and the stuff, identity and self and anxiety, the divine plenitude and al-wasi' and al-muhit. What are you compared to the one who is al-muhit? Stop kind of turning yourself into a little Fir'aun, because it's not really very smart. أنا ربكم الأعلى, I am your highest Lord. Well, we all say that as some part of our being, but sorry, doesn't work. So the secret of Tawhid, and hence the secret of pulling human beings together again in our fragmented and unhappy and technologically threatening time, is not just that everybody should have the correct aqidah, but there needs to be the human living out of that aqidah through the collective mutual reciprocal support of the believing community and helping people to turn towards the one qibla, away from the other qiblas of status and money and envy and whatever else it is. A lot of religious discourse nowadays is quite vengeful. We're going to get our own back on the regimes, and we're going to throw al-Assad into jail and whatever they did to Gaddafi in the name of this. Horrible, exactly the opposite of the prophetic idhabu fa antum tulaqa. It's a kind of reversion to Jahiliyyah, a lot of this stuff, even though outwardly it claims to be Islamic. That's not a solution either. It's going to divide people. Bring them together through forgiveness, through amnesty, and how is that enabled? Through absolute tawakkul that everything is in God's hands, and you don't really need to fear about anything. La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. It's the way of the awliya. Difficult for us. We do worry about things. We are sorry about things in the past. And to the extent that we're human, there is a legitimacy to that, but it shouldn't get us at the deep core of our being, where we should instead be saying, La ilaha illallah. We know that Allah is in charge because He's Al-Wasi', Al-Qadir, Al-Aziz, Al-Qahhar. Nobody else is in charge. So this is a way of remaining sane amidst the kind of shouting terrors of modernity and the things that divide human beings from human beings. There must be a collective effort, this tawasi, counselling one another to truth and to patience in this age, which is a fraternal thing, and which is about forgiveness and overlooking the faults of others. Our community is driven apart, even religious communities, because we tend to see with the eye of the nafs that wishes to feel secure about itself by observing the faults of others. Usually when people say, brother, you're holding your hands wrong in the masjid, that's because the ego is anxious and wants to feel superior. 9 times out of 10 when people correct each other is to demonstrate their own superiority. Not because they really care or even know much about the fiqh, but they really want to interfere with people and to be pharisaical. But the true self, the Tawhidic self, the self that is submitted through these 99 names and is therefore at ease with God's power and God's mercy, can kind of relax a bit, lighten up, and the ruh, when it's activated, naturally sees what's beautiful. The nafs likes to see what's unsatisfactory in other people, and the ruh, because its food is beauty, it likes to see what's good in other people. And that's the prophetic way. Perhaps on that great day, the greatest day of Arabian history, he looked into the souls of Hind and Abu Sufyan and all of the others who were there, kind of shaking in their boots. And because of his ruh, he saw their potential, and he saw what they were called to be, rather than seeing all of the kind of scorpions in their souls. And because of that, he knew what they were called to be and let them off. That's a very high rank. But this is the way of the awliya. Their nature is to be forgiving, and this has to influence the fiqh of the ijtihad as well. But we need to be forgiving of other people and find easy interpretations. Because the ego likes to make Islam really difficult. We of course are going to comply with all of these strict things, usually, but not always, because we know that some people will stumble and it gives us more opportunities to criticize others, which is very subversive to the religious faith of any community. So to wrap up, everything really is about Tawhid. The Holy Prophet's message is about the oneness of the divine from beginning to end, and through that Tawhid, his community mirrored that, and the Sahaba, who of all of these tribal and racial and gender perspectives, united. لو أنفقت ما في الأرض جميعا, had you spent everything that is on the earth, all of the money to bribe and pay off these tribes, ما ألفت بين قلوبهم, you would not have brought their hearts together. ولكن الله ألف بينهم, but Allah brought them together. So through the Tawhid of the divine, in submission to the benign purposes of the divine towards the faithful ummah, that all of these fractions and this human mirroring of the diversity of the cosmos in a kind of atomistic zero-sum game between competing unit groups and tribes and genders and individuals, that can only be overcome through the light of Tawhid and through the deep wisdom of La ilaha illallah, nothing worthy of worship except Allah. So set aside all of your priorities and make your life a single priority. And this is the meaning of ikhlas. It means to reduce as much as possible the number of your intentions in every act. Ultimately, ikhlas means to do everything for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not a little bit for Allah, a little bit because it's time to pray, and a little bit because my friend was and all of the other stuff, which is the proliferation of niyyahs. Imam Ghazali explains it in the term of ikhlas. Ikhlas means purification, and hence the reduction of the number of intentions. And to the extent that we say Allahu Akbar and La ilaha illallah and believe in the absolute ineffable perfection of the object of our devotion, and feel that we are in need of some mirroring of that perfection, then all of these other things will start to disappear from our communities, and we will be khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas, once again the best of ummahs brought out for mankind, because we'll just be luminous people, and the fitra in everybody which craves light will see it in us, and we'll see all kinds of gates of plenty open for this ummah, and inshallah we'll have this overcoming of the social and sectarian and ethnic and gendered fractions that we've been reduced to, and will be ibadallahi ikhwana, Allah's slaves as brethren. So may Allah inshallah open us up towards the true facing of the Qibla, true love for following the Sunnah, true love for the chosen one, true love for what the Spirit perceives, a genuine fight against the lower self and the disasters of the lower self, and inshallah a desire for brotherhood and forgiveness and amnesty amongst Bani Adam in the Ummah and also beyond. Barakallahu feekum wa afu minkum. Wassalamu alaikum wa
rahmatullah. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. We are so fortunate to have you. If only you could have you here every week or every month, perhaps we should clone you. It's just kidding. I'm just kidding. It's totally antithetical to what you've been telling us, obviously. We are going to open the floor for your questions, so we have 30 minutes. Everyone has a show of hands. Okay, we have one over there, so
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, that was amazing. Thank you so much. So, question is, Bismillah, is there such a thing as a metaphysical imbalance to the universe, and what causes it? Like, what would cause an imbalance? And that was my question. Thank you.
Interesting. Allah says in Surah Al-Mulk, "La tara fi khalqi ar-Rahmani min tafawut." You don't see any inconsistency in the creation of the Rahman. Everything is simply the outworking and the outpouring of his 99 beautiful names. Nobody else's name is involved in anything that's going on. So, if you can speak of something that is not as it should be, you could say that it is the veil that is over the eyes of people who are called to be Allah's khulafa. That is to say, it's nafs, which is a phenomenon that doesn't exist in any other order of creation. The birds, the animals, they give tasbih, they make their salat in perfection. They are as they are intended to be, and they give praise with their lisan al-hal. But then, وَكَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ, many of mankind also give tasbih, but others don't. So if there's a cleft in creation and something that has, from our perspective, gone wrong, okay, which is not, of course, the divine perspective, because the divine is always fully in control. It's the existence of this strange shadow that makes us unduly addicted to worldly things in themselves. We are not to be monks and nuns and live in caves in the Himalayas and run away from God's world, because wherever you are, you're in God's world until you die. And even after you die, you're in God's larger context of creation. The Akhirah is His as well. But instead, we need to go through the world, but understanding the world as a kind of veil where, because of our inadequacies, we don't perceive things in their luminous reality. The Quran often speaks of Allah's light and of the shadows. So Allah nur samawati wal ard. He is the light of the heavens and of the earth. Nothing is not in its deep being, in the being of the divine, because you can't get outside al-wasi', but He alone is the creator. But there's also the zulumat, which is spoken of negatively. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاؤُهُمْ الطَّاغُوتُ يُخْرِجُونَهُمْ مِنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ. The Taghut, the false principle, the one that inverts, that wants to get back to the false priorities of the Jahiliyyah, which is in all of us, take people out of the light into the Zulumat. يُخْرِجُونَهُمْ مِنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ. Nur is one, because it's from the Tawhid, it's indivisible, absolute, perfect, dazzling. Or Zulumat to the shadows, which is one way of looking at the world in its worldliness. That we look at things and we usually don't see them as the direct creation of God manifesting certain divine qualities. Instead we think, oh, there's a camera, there's a carpet, there's this, there's that. We see things in their Nurani, Mazhar essence more clearly when there hasn't been much human intervention. In the natural world, we contemplate the sea or a tree or these afaq. The Quran is urging us to look at this khalq as-samawati wal ard. But to the extent that the material world has been manipulated for dunya reasons or for profane reasons, the works of human beings sometimes seem to intensify the shadows, and we don't see through them to the light any longer. Which is why sacred art is so important, because sacred art is there to take a material surface and to make it, as it were, luminous again, so we look through it to its true source. And art, of course, has always been one of the great products and concerns of Islamic civilization. So, if something is imbalanced or wrong in the earth, it's because of human beings sent down to asfala safilin, lower than everything else, because we see things wrongly and react for ego rather than for truth, justice, compassion, light. But that, again, of course, it's all by the divine permission. The shaitan rebels by the divine permission. It is sent down by the divine permission so that the deep mystery of the human suspendedness between heaven and earth, dunya and akhirah, good and evil, ruh and nafs, can be possible. And so that we are in a position to move above the lower self into the nurani realms. A deep question, but that's kind of part of the answer.
I mean, just quickly, like, how would you know, how would we know that it's in imbalance or imbalance?
Well, because the Quran is very clear. ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. Corruption has appeared by land and by sea because of what human hands have earned. Climate change is just an example of that. Things are unbalanced, not because of human beings in their noble restraint and concern for each other and desire to worship, but because of our endless craving for stuff. That's what's caused this mass corruption. It's a kind of environmental activists, I suppose. We're all seeing the consequence of it. The mizan has been disrupted.
Do I have more questions?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Just wanted to say, so honored to be here. I just flew in yesterday, so alhamdulillah. I wanted to ask a bit of a personal question, like some nasiha. because I come from a mixed background and I've been very nomadic with 3 kids. Alhamdulillah. And I know there's a big mass migration going on, like hijrah, and this maybe a little bit off topic, but I feel like, how do I put it? What is the way forward? What are practical steps and solutions to move forward as someone like myself, like not finding home, not finding peace? I guess my husband's also a revert from Bali, and his mom's Jewish American, and I know I'm getting into details, but we're really just seeking, we want to seek knowledge, we want to be a part of a community, but this transience that we're experiencing, and I feel like there's other people like me out there. What are the practical solutions, inshallah?
Well, we're all transient. I guess we're just wandering through this world. We don't really belong here. We feel that we all feel we're mystics one way or another. وما هذه الدنيا بدار إقامة وإن هي إلا كالطريق إلى الوطن. This world is not a place of abode, it's just a road to the homeland. Watan is with God. This world is shadows and light, and it's necessarily uncomfortable. خلقنا الإنسان في كبد. Misfortune is the nature of this whole thing's not quite right, and every day we go through discomforts. One of the gifts of Islam is that it does provide one with a kind of watan. It gives you a form of life that is mobile, that you can travel with. It gives you a narrative and a history which goes back to the centuries of Islam, back to the Sahaba and the Seerah, which is everybody's story, not the story of just one category of human beings. That is a kind of portable identity that's a very strong one. That's probably stronger than any national identity nowadays. They all tend to be attenuating anyway. One can complain, as I guess I do as a British Muslim, that my identity is complex, although it doesn't really faze me particularly. But I see that so many British people feel that they're losing their identities and that they're not sure where they are or what's going on. That's one reason we have these nativist nationalist movements across the Western world. People are kind of rattled by globalization and modernity. And the Ummah has always been an Ummah of intermarriage. Everybody marries people from everywhere else. If you go to any large Turkish town, for instance, and ask people who've done their DNA tests where they're really from, everybody's a mixture of everything. A mixture of Bosnian and Serbian and Armenian and Arab and Kurdish, and they're all a mixture. And that's again one of the signs of the Seerah. Who did the Holy Prophet marry Bilal al-Habashi from? This was very shocking to the kind of Arab sensibility at the time. He was Ethiopian, of slave origin, from outside the Arab world, black. He married him to an aristocratic, very fair-skinned Arab woman. And he liked to do that. Salman al-Farisi, Suhaib bin Sinan. The greatness of the Sharia is that it allows you to feel that you are part of some narrative. That's fine. We're trying to not abolish. But the Islamic identity is higher than that and more real. So the poet says, أبي الإسلام لا أبا لي سواه إذا افتخروا بقيس أو تميم. My father or my forefather is Islam. I have no other forefather. When people are boasting of being from the tribe of Qais or of Tamim. So that's, I think, one of the appeals of Islam is that it does give you a very strong transnational identity when other identities are falling apart. Which is one reason I think why so many of our converts to Islam in England attenuate are people from mixed backgrounds.
If I may add another question related to that a bit, what is your thought on the idea of Ibn Khaldun that many government and society find to be a glue, tribalism to be the glue that gives strength to the budding civilization in the past, and also could be applied today, do you think this is aspect of outdatedness to it or some kind of adaptation that needs to be done?
Well, human beings are, rightly or wrongly, naturally tribal. But where this tribalism turns into a kind of ideology or justification for the nation state, it can be more trouble than it's worth, because it tends to exclude people who very often will come from minority backgrounds. And many of the moral catastrophes of Europe in the 20th century were the result of various limiting ideologies of national belongingness, which we're finding across the European continent now. Who is a real Frenchman? Who is truly German? Who is really Italian? Does that include people of immigrant origin? How long do they have to be around before we consider them to be Italian or Swiss or something? Maybe it's the largest single political controversy in Europe at the moment. There's no clear answer. A much more civilized response is, for instance, in the traditional Muslim dynasties, the Ottoman Empire never called itself a Turkish empire. And it was actually rude if you called somebody a Turk. For the Ottomans, even though Europe called them Turks, a Turk meant a kind of nomad who used to eat sheep kebab in the evening at this mountain place in Anatolia somewhere, and probably couldn't read or write. The Ottoman dynasty didn't consider itself to be Turkish. They really had a complicated DNA. So the asabiya of the tribe, used as the basis for a nation state, particularly in a complex, ethnically composite nation state, is probably not in the national interest. Multiculturalism is just a reality of today's world of migration and intermarriage, and we really can't adopt a totalitarian view of belongingness. And the price that it brings is too high. And the greatness of Islam is that because it believes in Bani Adam and overthrew tribalism, it can provide a better basis for national cohesion than any mythology of the master race or those who truly belong.
Thank you, Sheikh. Can we proceed to the next question? Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Jazakallah for your efforts, your sharing your talks. I really like when you talk about love. And typically, when we talk about love, the most common conception is about romantic love. So, obviously, it's beyond that. My question is, how do we better conceptualize love in an Islamic perspective? Thank you.
Well, what I was getting at, I guess, was that amongst all of these transformations that the Arabs went through as a consequence of the prophetic upending of the way the Arabs saw the world, is that if you look at their literature before Islam, and we have some fragments of it, it's all about boasting about the pride, about the swiftness of one's camel, about the number of adversaries one has met triumphantly in the field of battle. It's kind of boasting. It usually begins with some kind of amatory or romantic prelude, which they call the nasib. And then it becomes a kind of wandering tale of my beloved's encampment is gone and I'm off in the desert. And when Islam transforms the literature of the Arabs, what happens is that they create a new genre in which they take this amatory prelude and they turn it into a whole genre of poetry, the ghazal, which the pagan Arabs have never done. So romantic love becomes a kind of major theme, the major theme of early Islam. Often Muslims are rather surprised by this. They like the great theme of early Islamic Arabic literature to be about jihad or wudu or I don't know what they prefer. But the objective fact is, if you look at the poets from early Islam, like Omar bin Abi Rabi'a, who's the great poet of Medina at the time of the Tabi'een, it's all love poetry, and at a very high, it's not kind of improper, it's very chivalric and beautiful. That's one of the most unexpected consequences of how Islam changed the sensibilities of the Arabs. And very quickly that turns into a kind of metaphysical thing, that it becomes Layla and Majnun. Layla's family have taken her away into the desert, and Majnun doesn't know when he'll see her again, so he wanders around talking to the animals and talking about Layla all the time until everybody's fed up with it, so he talks to the gazelles and stuff. Kind of the most familiar theme in Islamic literature is Layla and Majnun. The poets, the ulama, Nizami, Jami, Ibn Kamal, they all have a Layla Majnun thing. This becomes Islam's favourite story. But of course, what they saw in it was that that kind of story of tragic searching for the lost beloved is exactly the story of every human being. That at the day of Alastu bi Rabbikum, we were with the beloved, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who alone is truly to be loved. And now we're kind of in the desert of this world, uncomfortable. And to the extent that we remember that, we're saying the beloved, constantly, this kind of obsessiveness is how we should be. If you look at all those narratives of how Majnun's family tried to cure him of this annoying infatuation. So in, I think it's Jami's version, his parents say, all right, let's take him on the Hajj, that'll kind of get her out as well. And so he's doing the tawaf, and they say, just pray to be delivered from the memory of this nuisance Layla. And instead he says, Allahumma zidni hubba laha. Oh Allah, give me more love for her, give me more love for her. It's kind of a humorous thing, but it's exactly the religious thing that we need, more love. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. Faith should mean the love of God, not just fear and compliance with the Quran. Says the love of God, but that necessarily comes. It doesn't say those who have Iman should love God more. It means those who have Iman in God do love Him more. Otherwise it's not authentic, it's some kind of other ideological thing. It's a good measurement of one's faith. Do I love God, or am I just following something that's in the book? It's a pretty clear and sometimes quite concerning yardstick. So that becomes the great story of Islam, that the Adiyat al-Hubb al-Udri, chivalric love, then goes into Europe through Muslim minstrels in Spain and becomes the only chivalric love invented by Islam. So there's a kind of decadence in modern Islam that assumes that a pure emotion between human beings is a kind of worldly distraction, or it's like kind of Bollywood story, and it's sort of silly, but not the case. You know? Again and again you find in our literature, William Chittick, for instance, has this whole book about Islamic literature of love, and he says at the beginning, some people say Islam is the religion of peace. Nowadays some people say Islam is the religion of justice, etc. He goes through this kind of conventional generalistic stereotype. But he says on the basis of his 50 years in the libraries, he said Islam is the religion of love, because that's the great focus of our writers. Even if it's kind of metaphorical, boy meets girl, or whatever, or it's the love of creation, but it's undeniably the case in the libraries. Recently we've kind of moved away from that as we've kind of become artistic, puritanical in the wrong way, losing sight of the importance of the symbolic, not reading our literature any longer. We need to get back to these delightful ways in which the ulama have spent their lives trying to wake human beings up, thinking about the path to the divine beloved is a beautiful thing. What could be more beautiful than cutting away the web of falsehood and ego and coming to the one who's the source of all beauty? But still not paying attention, unfortunately. Alas.
In the archipelago, we actually have an author, Hamka, who writes love novels that has that religious connotation. But it has been turned into films like Indonesia, and maybe the romantic aspect sort of like pushed forth more than the spiritual aspect. I have a short question. If you have, okay, just one second. In relation to this one first. Yeah, in a minute. Since the brother mentioned love, I also have a question about the general understanding about these concepts like love, beauty, and I noticed today that you mentioned the word, the hint of holiness, And I suppose that is equivalent to your mentioning sacredness. Would you say that? And I'm just curious, this kind of terminology is sort of, by people out there thrown around when the actual implication is not really verified, and people are using to teach, metaphysical lessons from Ibn Arabi, for instance. But there comes a point when we cannot run from it anymore. Like I have students that I have to deal with who say that God is the universe, and as much as we trying to clarify the metaphysical systems that's different and out there, but there's also an aspect of a mixed family or mixed religious background. Do you agree that this is something that we have to deal with instead of hide away? Thank you.
Well, the experience of the sacred is something that is as old as Bani Adam itself, and the earliest images and the earliest structures known to exist, according to the archaeologists, are all to do with the human response to a sense of there being sacred times and sacred places. The oldest significant structures on Earth are at a place they're still excavating in Turkey called Göbekli, which is a very kind of enigmatic place because it's dated to about 12,000 BC, which is like twice as old as the pyramids, really ancient. It's on top of this dusty hill in southern Turkey, and they've been excavating it for about 25 years, and maybe they've only dug up a small proportion of it, and there are these circular halls with this kind of cantilever images of animals, but no writing, because this is long before writing, it's before the wheel. It seems to have been before agriculture. This is really primordial, kind of Paleolithic humanity. But the only explanation for these structures is that they represent a human response to the sacred, because there's no water supply nearby. It couldn't have been a habitation. The only possible function for these buildings is that they were temples. So the human perception of the sacred is as old as humanity itself. One of the virtues of traditional dwellers in forests and deserts is that they have a very strong sense of al-qarib, the nearness of the sacred, even though they may not have the theological language to make that monotheistic rather than animistic, but still they perceive it. That's what human beings do. We perceive the sacred, and we've always structured our lives on the basis of the sacred, of the divine, or the gods. The modern world makes that harder to access, but still we have a sacred calendar in Islam which has not been fiddled with. To the extent that the ego is suppressed, we detect the holiness of Ramadan. Most Muslims have a sense of the mysterious specialness of that time. We know when Ramadan is at an end that some fragrance has been lost. The holy places. Muslims are still transformed by the three holy cities. Each of them has a different way of articulating the sacred, which people kind of intuit. And again, because we're dealing here with al-wahid, the beyond, and muhit, so we can't really describe. These are experiences of the heart. You can't go in with a kind of spiritual Geiger counter and measure. It's clicking, this is holy. It's not like that. These are subtle things, very intimate and profound in our humanity. The city of Makkah, we know, is the place where we intuit the divine jalal, the majesty of the mystery of the infinite, which is presented to us by the Kaaba, which is not an experience of uns or intimacy, but an experience of human certitude, the absoluteness of the God of Abraham. Medina is different. Medina is said to be the city that's hard to leave. You leave the Haram in Medina and you feel, well, I'm really doing the wrong thing. Everybody feels bad when they leave Medina. How is that? Why is that? What's the quality of it? The prophetic presence? Again, it's a kind of fragrance we inhale that's very difficult to put into words. But that's an aspect of the sacred. And Jerusalem, Al-Quds, different again, because that's the city of the Mi'raj, but also the city of the prophets. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ prayed in union with Musa and Sayyidina Isa, founders of all monotheisms, are there. There's an affirmation that equally qawmin had, every messenger there has been a guide. It's very kind of ultimate interfaith dialogue, if you like. The fact that they actually prayed together, they embraced each other. No other religion has that image, which is why Jerusalem is so important. For one reason, it's a city of trans-historical reconciliation. But it has a different feeling again. So, yeah, the sacred, the perception of the sacred is the essence of sound religion, just as this love thing is, which is closely connected to it. Beauty is a way of detecting the sacred. And is that which makes us say labbaik, and is that which turns us heart-wise towards the Qibla, and which religion finds it very difficult to manage without forms of religion that are not really interested in barakah and holiness, that are only interested in a cause that's absolutely transcendent and other and one, tend not to survive for very long because they don't give human beings the spiritual nourishment that they need. There's no love, there's no beauty, there's no art, there's no qurb, divine closeness, only the absolute other who has to be submitted to and told is absolutely one, and there's lots of rules. That's not enough to nourish the human yearning for religious nourishment. So the sacred is the oxygen of the world that keeps our metabolism working. Without it, we tend to die quite quickly.
Thank you, Sheikh. I'm so sorry, sister, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Actually, I wanted to pin out, I'm a big fan of Shaykh Abdal Hakim. I'm listening to you since maybe 20 years plus, and I'm from Egypt, so I'm very happy that I meet you in Malaysia. I see you in person, and also thank you for everyone. My question is, what is the very small advice you give to parents to instill Tawhid in their children? Like a very small action, a very small word. Thank you very much.
I'm always in danger when asked this question of one of my own kids watching and saying, "You never did that." Probably true. I think that the small child's craving and right is for amusement, lightheartedness, a sense of security, a sense of trust, a sense of amazement, a sense of humour, a sense of the sacred, and stories that are not didactic but indicate truths that they already know in the fitrah, but indirectly. A lot of modern Muslim literature for children is kind of rather sort of preachy and schoolish, which I think puts them off. Instead, the child in the first 7 years in particular is in a kind of world of, it was with the fairies, it's imagination and excitement, and they should be affirmed in that, because that's the way in which God has created children to be at that age. They try and treat them like 15-year-olds when they're 5, affirm this is one of the marahil of their lives, and so there should be a lot of humour, but also ways of making them feel really proud and excited to be Muslims. So taking them to amazingly beautiful places, taking them to, quickly perhaps, to art galleries where they can see all the non-Muslims amazed by Islamic art, pointing out to them that some of the most famous and beloved buildings in the world, literature in the world, comes from the Muslims, give them a sense of the civilizational achievements of Islam. And the other thing that many people find is that seerah is very effective. There's something archetypal and amazing about the prophetic story that children immediately latch onto. If it's told in a beautiful but fairly easy English, they really do tend to get amazed by it. And that gives them a sense that the prophet is like their ancestor and the founder of their story and the initiator of their people into the meaning of life and existence. Probably all of the great stories of the seerah are ones that are kind of Shakespearean in their touching of certain archetypes. Here is the person who represents envy, here is the person who represents mistake and repentance. Here is the person who represents manhood. Here is the person who represents womanhood. Here is the good child. Here is the person. All of the strengths and weaknesses of the human palate are present in the stories of the seerah. So, in my experience of many parents, focusing on seerah storytelling is really effective. If you can play, say, Hamza Yusuf's 25 episodes on seerah, if you can play it in the car when the kids are strapped in the back, and they do pay close attention. Because they are transformed by it, particularly the miraculous aspect of it. So, anyway, that would be my recommendation. Allah, every child is different, though, of course. The mother's wisdom knows exactly what kind of alchemical ingredients to drop into the child's forming mind at what stage, and that's part of the responsibility of the gift of motherhood.
Okay, we have one last question. By the way, this is the book that Shaykh wrote.
Okay.
Yes. So you can take a look.
Nursery rhymes are small children.
Inshallah. Okay, continue please.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Mustafa.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Prof, recently some message struck me and I started thinking about what was said in a bigger audience, and that was about Islam being transactional or not, Tawhid being transactional or not. We do pray for reward, we want to go to Jannah, we do good things in exchange, so probably you already got the message. So can you clarify please? Thank you.
Well, it's from the prophetic statement, Deen Mu'amala, religion is interaction, and that the Deen comes into being in Medina, which is very much a collective environment. It doesn't come into being in its fullness in the cave in Iraq, but through engagement with different kinds of people and the struggles of life. And our capacity to improve and perfect ourselves if we're alone is fairly limited. Whereas our capacity to look at ourselves and to discuss ourselves with others is a lot easier when we're in the human environment. It is through egos bumping into each other that we learn about ourselves, not through sitting on our own, watching stuff on YouTube, or being alone in a cell somewhere in a state of khalwa. Ours is the tradition of engagement with others. It takes a very, very high type of human being really to work on himself or herself if they're completely alone. Occasionally there are people who have been like that, but it's not really for us. We are in this world which is a bridge to the next world, and part of the fun, part of the challenge is other people. Usually when we learn a lesson, it's because of something we've done with other people, or from something we've done on our own. Other people are life's university. And that means different types of relationship. Your relationship with your neighbour, with your friend, with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, different type of mu'amala each time. But there's prophetic guidance on all of those things, and a right way and a wrong way. And there can't really be ethics without human engagement with others. You can't really be ethical on your own. And Islam is the religion of akhlaq. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. It's a Tirmidhi hadith, and said only to perfect the noble qualities of character. How do we know what his qualities of character were? Because you see his the beauty of his actions with other people.
So the brother that has another question, I'm afraid we run out of time. Perhaps you can give it to the organizer or see Shaykh after this. I would like to ask about Cambridge Muslim College, which the Shaykh founded in 2009. Could you give us more information about perhaps how Malaysian students or any other students around the world could join and what is offered?
Inshallah. I mean, you can check it out on the internet, cambridgemuslimcollege.ac.uk. It's a small institution, a kind of little mouse compared to the elephant of the University of Cambridge. We have our own campus in the centre of town. We have usually between 50 and 60 full-time students, some of whom are online, but the online courses are only rather specialised, and they're for Islamic psychotherapy and counselling people who already have degree-level qualifications in sort of counselling and psychiatric work. We have a 3-year BA in Islamic Studies, and we have a 1-year diploma, which is for madrasa graduates who want to understand the modern world a bit better. And then we have various research fellows. How you can join if you're Malaysian, because of Home Office paranoia about illegal immigration, you have to have at least 500 students, unless you have them, before they give you the right to offer student visas. So I've been telling people here, the best way is to marry somebody in England. The visa is a spousal visa, which is fairly straightforward, and it is usually charge you for it. And then you can apply and he'll be very happy to see you. So that's our preferred route for Malaysian students to study at Cambridge Muslim College. Otherwise, it's basically through our online programs. We have a 12-session series on the Sierra, for instance, which is quite popular, not very expensive. We have a series called Paradigms of Leadership, which is free, which is about 30 key exemplars from Islamic history, from Muhammad and Khattab up to present-day people, each representing a particular style of Islamic leadership, female as well as male. So we do have quite a few online programs, which is perhaps the best way in which brothers and sisters in this part of the world can benefit. Or, of course, you can participate by sending us all of those petrodollars, which this country has been sort of reaping. We do accept zakat. If you're feeling guilty about your urge to buy a new electric vehicle, we can relieve you of that suffering by accepting your donation instead. We're very happy to provide that service.
It's very creative urge from you. Could you tell us more about any programs that you have for next year? Perhaps some of us could join you.
Well, we're running our conventional programs, the ones that I mentioned. We have some, for people who are physically present in the UK, they can attend our public lectures. Usually they are live streamed. Often people who are in a different time zone prefer to watch things online afterwards. So we have quite a big kind of YouTube presence, social media presence, and probably now several hundred classes and talks of various kinds, which are available for free on that platform. I don't particularly like the online world, but there it is, and it's relatively inexpensive, so we are populating that. But there's, in my experience and belief, there is no alternative that really competes with the traditional kind of face-to-face physical presence of student and teacher, and eating together and getting to know the teacher and asking questions informally and living in a group. And I think Islamic education is impoverished by this distance learning model. But nonetheless, we do it for better or for worse. And you're welcome to check out the website and see if there's anything there that's of interest. Or the Cambridge Central Mosque also has a lot of resources, written resources, music, Quran recitation, Tajweed and stuff that might be of interest to people here, inshallah. And don't forget us in your prayers.
Well, bless you for all your work and increase the da'wah and the successes over there, and unite us all in Jannah, inshallah. So that brings us to the end of today's program. Jazakallah khairan to the Shaykh for sharing with us his knowledge, his wisdom, and may Allah bless us all and increase us in our deeds as well. Perhaps Shaykh wants to make dua for us before we end. Jazakallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا يا مولانا بذنوبنا شقيا ولا محروما. يا رب العالمين تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا. ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. اللهم إنا عبادك وبنو عبادك وبنو إمائك، ماض فينا حكمك، عدل فينا قضاؤك، نسألك بكل اسم هو لك سميت به نفسك أو أنزلته في كتابك أو علمته أحدا من خلقك أو استأثرت به في علم الغيب عندك أن تجعل القرآن العظيم ربيع قلوبنا وجلاء أحزاننا وذهاب همنا وغمنا، وأن تجعل الحياة زيادة لنا من كل خير، وأن تجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اغفر لأهل الجامع يا رب العالمين، وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين آمين.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
For those in attendance, there's refreshments, some food and drinks served downstairs. Welcome to help yourselves.
Ni tekan macam bumi kat situ. Tak ni nak finish ke apa?